Hey guys, fancy seeing you here next to this big guy's head. I just wanted to let you know that you're going to be watching this video in Edpuzzle and taking notes. And my head will move around the screen, so make sure that you're paying attention. You can always go back and rewatch parts of this video, but you do need to answer the questions before you're allowed to go forward. So let's make sure that you are doing that, okay? So I'm going to actually skip through some slides. Actually, no, I'm not. So I hope that you're able to pay attention to this and see everything. I will eventually share the slideshow with you after the Edpuzzle is completed by everybody. All right, so this past week we've been talking about the Roaring Twenties and how prosperity grew during that time. But today we're actually going to spend a little more time talking about how the people were during this time as well. So one of the things we've led up to is that this growth, especially when we're talking about Warren G. Harding, this growth of nativism that was coming about. And we already knew that the immigrants weren't liked, the Chinese, and then after World War I, especially Eastern Europeans, and today we'll even talk about communists as well. So remember, nativism is a dislike of foreigners. We've compared a little bit to President Trump, and so of course I know that many of you would agree that people need to come into this country legally. And so, but I want you to also keep in mind, that doesn't necessarily mean you dislike foreigners. It means that you are maybe looking out for the safety of people in our country. So I would say if we could step back in time and go back into the 1920s, that while we can look and say the nativists didn't like foreigners, maybe they were looking out for the safety of our country, or maybe they weren't. So maybe it's a combination of both. Maybe some were scared, some just flat out didn't like foreigners. So don't put all people into one bubble whenever we talk about this. And nativists will continue to talk about as we go on throughout history this year. So nativists did not like foreigners or didn't trust them. They believed that white Protestant Americans were superior. I wanted to talk a little bit about what Protestant means. You might probably know this because there are many Protestants in our community. And you should have learned this in world history. So we have Christianity, and in Christianity, there's two main groups. There are Catholics and there are Protestants. And the Protestant Revolution started with Martin Luther, who separated from the Catholic Church, which that is actually could be disputed because he died never believing that he separated. He thought he reformed the church. So sometimes you'll hear of the Reformation. And so he thought he brought changes to the church. So Protestants and Catholics are both Christians. They're just different. Some of the things that they do are a little bit different. So some Protestants are Baptists, Church of Christ, Methodist. Basically anybody who is not Catholic Christian is Protestant Christian. Okay, so now we understand that. Not all Protestants during this time, but many white Protestants believed that white Protestants were superior to, of course, people of different skin color, Catholics, Jews, that sort of thing. So there was all sorts of discrimination going on. All of these beliefs led to restrictions on immigration into the United States. Now, we've talked about this already. This has been ongoing for a while. One of the big things that Americans were afraid of were communists. Continue to be afraid of that. You might talk to your parents today and they might say, we do not want our country to become communist. And so this is a fear that hasn't really gone away. It was known as the Red Scare. So from now on, whenever you hear the Red Scare, you know that Reds means communists and that Americans are afraid of communism. Sorry, let me shut that. This was the first Red Scare in the United States in the 1920s. We'll talk about the second Red Scare, and we could even dispute whether or not we're in a Red Scare right now. But we were afraid of that type of government because a communist government requires a dictator. Basically, under communism, you take the government, the leaders who are trusted are given the power to make decisions for everybody, to distribute the wealth evenly, to distribute food evenly, to make sure everybody has a nice home, or the same type of home, not necessarily nice. Nobody has more than the other. Well, what Americans tend to believe is well, we are inherently distrustful of government. Remember, we can take that back to our history, the American Revolution. We don't trust people in power, particularly a king. And Americans are afraid that if one person or one group of people have all of the power, then they become, they don't use their power appropriately. So that is why we are afraid of communism. So what Americans began to do during this Red Scare, they were terrified that people were convincing them to become communists or the public to be communists. They began to arrest them, jail them, and even kick them out of the United States. So this happens in the 1920s, which you may think, well, that's acceptable. I mean, weird things were happening in the 1920s, but it comes back again and happens in the 1950s. And in fact, we even have this long, huge 40-year Cold War that is this fight against communism that lasts all the way until 1991. So this is just kind of the beginning. Sometimes you'll hear it called the Red Scare. Sometimes it'll be called the Red Menace. But if you see red, you are thinking communist from now on. Like this one says, the Red Menace is real. Support all suspected communist activity. And you were supposed to turn that into the government, local government or whatever. So look at this political cartoon. It says, the quicker, the harder, the better. And here we have Uncle Sam, who appears to be kicking this man, and it says Alien Reds. He's got a bomb with him, and that his kick says deportation. Over here, it says back to where they belong, kicking them out of the U.S. across the ocean. Okay, so basically saying communists don't belong here. There is a bomb there because there was actually bombings that were taking place, one in New York City on Wall Street, that I think you'll see in a video that I'm about to show you. But basically, Americans wanted to deport or kick out of the country communists. They thought they were infiltrating or breaking into the United States illegally and trying to take our wonderful government and turn it into a communist government. And so this question is asking you, who is Alien Reds? And who is this? So you'll go ahead and answer that in your Ed puzzle. And if you put communist and Uncle Sam, you're right. Look at this question. It says, cartoons such as this one took the position that deportation was necessary because... Do you think the answer is? Of course, it's C, communists. Oh, these guys, Sacco and Vanzetti. I think it might be Sacco. I don't know how to speak Italian, but I think it is Sacco and Vanzetti. These guys were immigrants from Italy. They were, what you really need to know is they're anarchists, meaning they support no government whatsoever. There were two guys who worked for, I think, like a shoe factory, and they had a little case with money in it for payroll. They were attacked in an alley, and the payroll was taken, the money was taken, and they were shot dead. These two guys, Sacco and Vanzetti, were known anarchists, and there was this time we were afraid of people trying to change our government. They were arrested, even though they had somewhat of an alibi for the murder of these two guys. They kind of messed up. They said that they didn't have pistols or guns, and they actually did. One of them had a pistol with gun casings that matched what was the people who were shot. The other guy had a different kind of like shotgun pistol with him. But one of the most darning evidence was this hat that this guy had. I don't know if it's Sacco or Vanzetti. I think it's Sacco. That there was a hat that was found at the murder scene that matched the hat that he was wearing, or that he was seen to be wearing. What's really weird, though, is that it later was found out that this hat that was like the convincing evidence that helped them be found guilty, this hat wasn't found on the day of the murder when they found the murder victims. It was found a day later by a policeman who went back. So it's highly unlikely that this hat actually was there for the murder. That was probably somebody came by later and it was left there. They actually had him try it on during the trial, and so he went to go put it on, and it wouldn't even cover his head. But they still determined, they said, it is his hat. It fits the way that it's supposed to. Whose else's could it be? So even though it was highly unlikely it was his. It was the evidence that really helped them find these guys find him as guilty. And also, they were immigrants from Italy. They were anarchists. They had everything turned against them. Most people believe they truly were innocent and did not do it. Now, they had committed small crimes. They were anarchists. They were trying to get people riled up, but they didn't commit murder, probably. I don't know. I wasn't there. They were found guilty and they were executed by electric chair. And I have a video for you to watch.
Oh, ho, psycho, psycho. Oh, ho, Niccolo, psycho. Oh, ho, psycho, psycho. I just want to sing your name. Psycho, 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 psycho. Oh, ho, psycho, Nicola. Psycho, psycho. I just want to sing your name.
Beginning with the First World War, an alliance of the Departments of Justice, Labor, and Immigration initiated a campaign of repression. Agents broke into the homes of suspected radicals, arrested them, and seized their possessions. Many were deported. Most of the victims were foreigners, usually Russians, Italians, and Jews. Two men stand out as targets of the anti-radical campaign. They were Italian-born, residents of Boston for many years, respectable workers and dedicated anarchists. They were attempting to dispose of some anarchist leaflets when they were arrested on a charge of armed robbery and murder. Their names were Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti.
Oh, Psycho Vanzetti. Oh, Psycho Vanzetti. Psycho, Psycho Vanzetti. I just want to sing your name.
The state's evidence was flimsy, and the witnesses for the prosecution gave confused and contradictory testimony. Sacco and Vanzetti proclaimed their innocence, but they were convicted and sentenced to death. Appeal after appeal was denied. The case became an international cause. Marches and defense efforts were organized worldwide.
But on August 23, 1927, the state of Massachusetts, which had condemned Sacco and Vanzetti as violent and dangerous men, mobilized 500 heavily armed policemen to suppress protests and electrocuted the two Boston anarchists.
Ooh. So look at this question right here. It says, the trial of Sacco and Vanzetti in the 1920s was similar to the trial of the Rosenbergs in the 1950s, and that both trials were accompanied by. Now, we haven't learned about the Rosenbergs in the 1950s, but we know now about Sacco and Vanzetti, whatever, however you say his name. So they were both accompanied by, well, let's take our best guess. A, public reactions against organized crime. Were they gangsters? B, the concern that the United States would sink into a depression? I don't think so. C, nativist fears of foreign influence in the United States. There was nativism going on in the 1920s. They were Italian, didn't like foreigners. Or was it D, a grass movement to gain equal rights for minorities? So choose your answer. So Sacco and Vanzetti. Nativist fears, I hope that you chose that one. Look at this one. The executions of Sacco and Vanzetti in the 1920s demonstrated the A, federal government's war on crime, B, the persistence of lynchings, C, corruption of political machines, or D, increase in nativist attitudes. Which one is it? I hope you chose D. Let's talk about the KKK. Man, it existed in the 1860s, 1870s, after the Civil War, and it was not a big deal, really. That sounds bad. The KKK is a big deal, but after the Civil War, most people looked at it like it was stupid. The government actually stopped the KKK, and it disappeared for the most part until 1915 when something happened. There was, a movie called The Birth of a Nation, or A Birth of a Nation, The Romantic History of the Ku Klux Klan. That was the whole name of it. You can actually look it up and watch it on YouTube. It is a silent movie. And it was the first movie to be shown in the White House by Woodrow Wilson. He's reported to have saying, like his opinion of viewing it is, it was as if it was written by lightning, and if it would be something about, it would be so horrible if you didn't know it was true. So he's basically saying that he agreed with the movie and that what was happening, it was true. Let me explain about this Birth of a Nation. And I may have it on later slides, so I may be getting ahead of myself. But the Birth of the Nation is actually, it shows African Americans as being lazy, ignorant, uneducated, being dangerous to women. And so it fits this time period really well. Remember, we've talked about Ida B. Wells and how she went and looked at all of these cases of lynchings and proved that it was wrong. These black men were being lynched because of supposedly raping white women, and that wasn't very true in most of the cases. And so this is the time period that this existed in. So it's about a 3.5 hour silent movie. It includes words that you can see, and the actors are of course very dramatic. And there are black people in there, but they're not. They're white people with black skin. So that's where this black face comes from. And we'll actually look at pictures tomorrow of it. But they're made to look dumb, slow, lazy. After this, in fact, in Stone Mountain, Georgia, whenever they found out that this was going to premiere there, the KKK, this man started a group of the KKK. They went up to Stone Mountain, lit a cross on fire, and wore the traditional Ku Klux Klan outfit. And then the next day, the premiere came, and so many people flocked to this man who basically restarted the KKK because of this movie, A Birth of the Nation. So it came back in 1915 and had grown to up to 6 million members by 1924. But this time it was different. It wasn't just about freed slaves. It wasn't just about black people. They also focused hate and violence on immigrants, Catholics, and Jewish people. So remember, I told you there's this time these certain set groups of white Protestants felt like anybody else was not okay, and these were the groups that they looked at. Okay, so it caused hostility towards minority groups. There were many riots that broke out after World War I, and so you also have to remember that during this time there were these World War I veterans coming back, and some of them were black. And we already had the NAACP. They protested against the release of this movie, A Birth of the Nation. They protested against the KKK. But the KKK grew, and this was probably its biggest time in America, is the 1920s. In Chicago, 38 people were killed, and lynching continued, and it got completely out of control. And again, they had seen support from even presidents. They had infiltrated the police, especially in the South, and were basically allowed to get rid of anything, or get away with anything they wanted to. And so I asked you the question, if you listen carefully, I already told you who this was. Who was an advocate for equality and anti-lynching during this time, and even a little bit before? And I hope you remembered that it's Ida B. Wells. Fantastic progressive reformer. Okay, so how did the KKK control populations? One of the things that they did to make sure that there weren't black people on the street causing all kinds of ruckus, in their eyes they would have said, was lynchings. They didn't, if a black person gave any reason for them to be found guilty of something or look at someone the wrong way, many were lynched. If you look at this map, it shows you that from 1882 to 1968, how many lynchings took place. In these dark states, 160 to 581, and just very interesting to see how this has changed. And you can see most of the lynchings are in the South. Okay, I've got another video for you to watch here.
The birth of a nation sparked a revival of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. The Klan's ideology of white supremacy and what they called 100% Americanism resonated across the country.
The Klan of the 1920s was not a rural Klan, which the Klan of Reconstruction had primarily been. The Klan of the 1920s was very big in surprising places, places like Denver, like Portland, Detroit, which had huge waves of immigration, both of Catholics from Europe and of African Americans coming from the South.
In 1925, 50,000 Klansmen and women gathered in Washington in a vivid display of their numbers. 4 million Americans claimed Klan membership.
That particular Klan also became very, very powerful politically. They elected at least 10 governors. And there were all sorts of public officials who were elected by power of the Klan.
The Klan has a great rise in terms of membership through the first half of the 1920s and has an equally spectacular fall. There were a number of exposés of what the Klan was doing in terms of its violent underside. When you throw scandals in that really embarrass the leaders, that kind of publicity really eroded its credibility.
Okay, so I'm going to actually skip through this very quickly. Oops, so we can talk a little bit more. And actually, I think I'm going to stop us there for today because I do not want to get into eugenics until tomorrow. So we will stop here and talk more about eugenics, and hopefully we can talk more about it in person too, because that stuff is crazy. All right, guys, you have a great day.